The foundation of the occupational health and safety legislation, whether you look at it from the provincial perspective or the federal perspective, is the internal responsibility system. And so the reason I talk about the internal responsibility system is because as committee members, you need to understand what the role is of the committee within that internal responsibility system. So the internal responsibility system basically says that everyone in the workplace is responsible for health and safety, and everyone has duties and responsibilities assigned for what they're supposed to do for health and safety in the workplace. Most of those responsibilities are actually spelled out in detail in the Canada Labour Code Part 2. And the Health and Safety Committees play an important role in that internal responsibility system. So that you understand it, the role of the committee in the internal responsibility system, and the internal responsibility system is made up of the employer and made up of the employees, right? That's who makes up that internal responsibility system. And where do you think the committee fits into that internal responsibility system? You think right in the middle?
Hopefully.
Hopefully. The committees, the health and safety committees, are actually on the outside of that. They're on the outside, and they become the auditors for that internal responsibility system. So the committee really is the auditing group or the auditing team for the internal responsibility system. They're there to oversee that the system that's been set up for health and safety in the workplace is working properly for the employer and working properly for the employees. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's really the role of the committee in the internal responsibility system. Their role is not to do health and safety. Their role is not to enforce health and safety, police health and safety. Their role is not to develop policy and procedure. Their role is to audit that internal responsibility system. Is it really working well for us? That's really the role of the committee. So hopefully with that understanding, then we can proceed with the presentation and you'll have a better idea of what I'm trying to get at. So when we look at the internal responsibility system, it's a principle, right? It's an idea that the workplace parties, the employer and the employees, are in the best position to identify health and safety problems, and because they're in that best position to identify those problems, they're also in the best position to provide effective solutions or control measures to deal with those health and safety issues or problems that arise in the workplace. And the idea of the internal responsibility system is to actually, if we do this well, continuously improve in health and safety, and eventually become self-reliant, self-sufficient for health and safety. We don't need the external system. We don't need the enforcement people to come in and tell us what to do. We do this ourselves, and we do it well. So that's really the premise or the idea behind the internal responsibility system and how the committees fit into that internal responsibility system. But I can tell you that no committee will be able to do their job properly, and no committee will function effectively unless the employer has done what? Unless the employer has developed and implemented an effective occupational health and safety program. And who do you think, whose job do you think it is to actually develop and implement that program?
The employer.
That's the employer's job. That's not the committee's job, right? And a lot of times committees are actually dragged into doing this. This becomes the duty or the function of the committee. And many employers, come on in, no worries. Many employers, once they set up their committees, just shuffle all the responsibility for health and safety towards the committee and say, now that you guys are set up, you guys run, you guys do health and safety for me. And that's not the role of the committee. The role of the committee is to actually audit or oversee if the system, the programs we have put in place for health and safety are working well for us or not. And then if they identify any gaps or they identify any room for improvement, make recommendations to the employer to do that. So it is the duty of the employer to develop the program. It is the duty of the employer to implement that program. And the committees are there to oversee and audit and make sure that the program is running well. And make recommendations where they think we need improvement or where they see that there would be gaps. Yes?
It is with consultation.
Yes. Yeah. And yes.
It's not like
it's not done separately.
the
Yeah.
employer
Yeah. Yeah, and the reason is that maybe I'm being a little bit too much on one side, but I know a lot of employers actually, once the committee's been set up, they just transfer all the responsibilities and they say, you guys run, you guys do health and safety for me, and that's not really how it should be done. It's a joint effort. And many of the duties, many of the requirements under the Canada Labor Code, you're right, require the employer to do this with the consultation and the participation of the committees, right? So the committees are there to assist, participate, but the committees are not there to develop health and safety and to run health and safety for the employer. The committees are there to assist the employer once the program has been developed and has been implemented. That's really the role of the employer. And I often get calls or emails that say, so what does a good health and safety program look like? IHSA, we use the CORE, the Certificate of Recognition. The CORE audit tool is actually available on our website. You can download it. It's a PDF file, and it has 19 elements to it. So if you're looking to set up your health and safety programs and you want to know what's an effective health and safety program, possibly 19 elements you should have in that health and safety program. And what are the elements of that program, and what would be some of the things that would be asked if you were audited under that program to make sure that you have as part of the program for each element. So you know, if you're looking for a good template for developing a good health and safety program, CORE may be a good way to go. Okay? For the committees to be effective, an effective committee will have to have member commitment. That's the starting point. If the members are not committed to what the purpose or the goal of the committee is, then maybe they should relinquish their position to someone who will be committed to being a member of the committee. So commitment to what? What sort of things do you think members need to be committed to? Participate, yeah. Attend meetings. Participate in investigations. Participate in workplace inspections. Participate and cooperate in coming up with ideas, suggestions, and recommendations on how to improve health and safety, right? Promote health and safety. So there needs to be that member commitment. And a lot of committees that I do work with, that commitment is not visible, or that commitment is often lacking, right? Just because the employer buys us pizza when we meet every month, that shouldn't be the commitment, right? Attending the meetings because I get an hour or an hour and a half off work shouldn't be the commitment, right? Free slice of pizza shouldn't be the commitment, right? There has to be a commitment to the cause, the goal, the objective of what the committee was put together for. Effective committees will also have members who bring different skills, strengths, weaknesses, and personalities to the meeting, right? So we need to have people with different ideas, different perspectives, who may come in and make recommendations or suggestions on how to improve things. Effective committees will also have employer and employee support and involvement. I know a lot of committees where, or a lot of companies where the employer has no clue what the committee is working on. The employees don't even know who sits on the committee and what the committee does for them. How effective is that committee, right? No employer, no employee support or involvement. Effective communication, participation, teamwork, problem-solving processes. So these are skills that we are not born with. These are skills that we develop either with experience or training. And so employers who are good employers and have recognized this give their committee members additional training in this area. What does it mean to have effective communication? What does it mean to have good meetings, right? How do we get along together? How do we work together as a team? Those are not skills that we are born with. Those are things that we need to develop, and we need to either learn through experience or we need to learn through training. So it's important that the committee members understand that. And then a budget. Now, before I go discuss this bullet point, don't go back to your workplaces tomorrow and say, as Ivan told me, Ivan and IHSA said, we need $20,000. That's not going to work. Budget is a good idea. And what would the budget be used for? Training, yeah. Attending presentation seminars like what you're doing today. Updating yourself, right? Maybe subscribing to a magazine or an association, right? Personal protective equipment that the committee members may require, right? Audio-visual equipment that the committee may need. Inviting someone to come in and do a presentation to the committee may require a little bit of a budget, right? So the budget would help the committee be able to do certain things that would help them, take them to the next level and really help the company, the employer, improve health and safety. So, but again, this is not a legislative requirement. So please don't go back and say, Ivan said, you know, we need so much money. Terms of reference. Every committee should have terms of reference. How many of you here have a terms of reference? That's good. Have you read the terms of reference? Do you comply with the terms of reference, right? So the terms of reference is very important. Every committee should have one because the terms of reference, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, becomes the guideline or the policy for how the committee is going to operate. Right? And unless you have that, then you're joining a team where you don't know what the goal or the objective or the purpose of that team is, and you don't know what your functions and your roles and your responsibilities are within that team. So the terms of reference would spell that out. And I'll have a slide that explains some of the things that should be on that terms of reference. An effective committee will have effective meetings, so we'll talk a little bit about meetings. An effective committee will also have supported workplace inspections and investigations. There needs to be support given to the committee for conducting these activities. These are required duties of the committees, and so the employer and the employees need to support the committees in these activities. And an effective committee will receive education and training. A lot of employers don't do this very well. And yes, if you're provincially regulated, the training program is called certification training, and the Ministry of Labor is changing that program this year entirely. But if you're federally regulated, it's unfortunate, but the duty is there to the employer to provide the committee members with the prescribed training in health and safety. But the prescription, the regulation, hasn't come out yet. They came out with a draft last year, and they gave us a peek, a little peek at what they wanted to do, but it stayed in the draft format and it hasn't actually passed. It didn't actually make it into the new changes of the Canada Labor Code. But eventually, I'm only assuming that there will be a regulation that spells out what the specific training will be for committee members. So committee members will have to receive some training in some very specific areas. So those are some of the things that will support an effective committee. And so, what are some of the barriers to having an effective committee? Yeah, so sometimes the decision-making process may be the barrier, right? Maybe we don't have one. Yeah, sometimes it's the lack of attendance or lack of commitment from the committee members, don't attend meetings.
And getting the employer to agree to certain, or employees and employers both to agree
on certain issues or ideas or recommendations that are going to be made. Yeah, so sometimes it's an issue of conflict internal to the committee. Shift work. So sometimes it's the timing that becomes a barrier, right? So the committee members are not available all the time because of the different shifts. People are on vacation, right? Yes?
Understanding of their roles.
Yeah, oftentimes it's misunderstanding of their roles. They joined the committee. They were basically, I call it voluntold to be on the committee, right? And they don't really know what their duty, responsibilities, and functions are, right? So they come in with skewed or misguided information as to what they're supposed to be doing in the committee. Right? Yes, exactly. So, lack of knowledge of the roles and functions of their workplace, right? So what you were saying is correct, right? That lack of knowledge. Senior management lacks visible involvement and support, and this can affect the committee's profile and ability to exert workplace influence. So sometimes there is no support from upper management for the committee. The committee lacks technical skill and knowledge, and this impedes our ability to identify and effectively address key hazard issues. So the committee members didn't receive proper hazard management training. They don't understand the importance of hazard recognition, hazard assessment, hazard control, and they don't understand how to do that. So how well are they going to do their job if they don't have that basis education training to be able to do that? When they go out and do their inspections, what are they looking for if they don't know the different types of hazards they should be looking for, right? So a lot of times that's the barrier to a good, effective committee. Lack of organizational skills. So sometimes the committee is not organized. They're very, very disorganized, and They lose minutes, things are not posted, things are not communicated. We told you, no, you didn't tell us. There's no good communication, right? So a lot of times it's their organizational skills that actually do them in. That doesn't allow them to work effectively as a committee, right? And so they end up losing credibility in the workplace, and the employer doesn't trust them, workers don't trust them, and the committee is really not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Oftentimes, guess what the committee spends their time on, a lot of time on? And the committees become the dumping ground for every health and safety issue in the workplace. This is what I call the fix-it items, right? Light bulbs, trip hazards, maintenance issues, equipment issues. That's what becomes the committee's work, right? Getting things fixed, repaired, replaced. So if I was an employer and I was looking at minutes and I was looking at the fix-it items, then guess who I would get rid of that I really wouldn't need anymore in my workplace? I wouldn't need those supervisors and managers who are responsible for facility maintenance, equipment maintenance. I've got my committee who's doing that for me. I could save big salaries there. Right? That's what the committees have become, the fix-it department. Right? And that's not really the role of the committee. The committee needs to be looking at the bigger picture within the company, health and safety issues. Sure, if it's a repeat issue, then the committee should get involved. But you know, replacing a light bulb, someone in the facility, I guarantee you, is responsible for looking after the facility, for looking after equipment, for looking after machinery, for looking after tools, right? For looking after potholes in the parking lot. There should be someone responsible for that. That shouldn't be the role of the committee. So I want you to make sure you understand that. That's not the role of the committee. That's not the purpose of why committees are set up under the Canada Labor Code. And many times what happens with committees is it's an us versus them attitude. I've been to committee meetings where the employer sits on one side of the table, the employees sit on the other side of the table, and they're very, very confrontational. That's not the purpose of the committee. The purpose of the committee is to work together as a team, and our goal is health and safety, improving health and safety, making things better for the employees, right? So sometimes that's the big barrier there. And inadequate resources provided, so the employer doesn't provide the committee with the resources they need, the information they need to be able to be successful. And a lot of times management fails to address the committee's recommendations. This I see as a big source of committee members becoming frustrated, leaving the committee, and then what does the employer have to do? Start committees. Every year the employer is recruiting and starting the committee again. That's a symptom of, you know, management fail to support, cooperate with the committee, and maybe make, you know, address or answer to the committee's recommendations. So what eventually happens is the committee members become frustrated, right? Everything we recommend, the employer squashes. So why should I waste my time in a losing team, right? I got other things to do here in the company. I'm busy doing my job. I don't want to be part of this losing team. I'm out of here. And so the committee falls apart and the employer starts recruiting and starting the committee again, right? And that is very costly to an employer. So employers need to understand that they need to support, cooperate, and do a better job at setting up their committees and supporting their committees so that the committees become a little bit more effective. So those are some of the barriers there. So how do we get started then in setting up our committee? Well, we need to determine the number of committee members we need. Yes, sorry, a question.
Sorry, just to the previous slide.
Yeah.
During the inspection,
yes.
Instead of looking for these fix-it items,
yeah.
what should the committee be looking for?
I'd have to do another training session just specifically for that. Yeah. But the idea here is to put a little bug in your ear that says, you know what, the fix-it items are really not what we should be concentrating our efforts on, right? And just to make it, you know, just general, does the company, what is the most common type of injury we have? And have we really addressed that properly? If those injuries are still happening, then all we've been doing really over time is putting Band-Aid measures to address them. Then how can the committee help the employer make better recommendations and maybe better things we need to put in place, right? Do we have a fatigue prevention program? Have we addressed, how many of you have attended the mental or the stress presentations, right? Does our health and safety program include mental health issues, right? Do we, you know, do we have a good collision prevention program? Those are the things that the committees should actually be spending their effort, their resources in, right? Those are the things, right? That's would the bigger picture, long term, make big impact, make big difference in the health and safety statistics of the company. That's where they should be looking at, right? I could tell you that if you look at the WSIB statistics, almost 50% of the lost time injuries reported every year into WSIB for the past 20 years, 2 decades, guess what's the number one lost time injury? MSDs, musculoskeletal disorders or musculoskeletal injuries. And when I go to most employers, federally regulated employers, guess what they're lacking in their program? An MSD prevention program. That's where the committee should be working on. That's where the committee should be making recommendations, right? The light bulb, not a big issue. It could be, it could be, it could be. It needs to be fixed, but it's not a priority, right?
Not by the committee.
Well,
Yeah, by the committee. Yeah.
It's a priority if
Mhm.
it affects the way.
If it is, if it could become a safety issue, I could see that, definitely, yes, yes. But I'm just hoping you understand,
It's
yeah.
important to get
Yeah.
them off your agenda as
Yeah.
fast as they come
Yeah.
on.
And the problem is that,
In a workplace
yeah.
inspection, they
Yeah.
need to be fixed.
And the problem is that a lot of times in many workplaces, the committee becomes the dumping ground for all kinds of issues that are not really health and safety related. And so employees know that if they run it through the committee, because the committee deals with health and safety, and if it becomes a health and safety issue, that the employer will pay attention to it. So the committees oftentimes end up spending their time and resources on things that are really not health and safety related. And that's where the committees shouldn't be going, right? So how do we get started with the number of employees? Well, at a minimum, how many members does a committee need under federal legislation? Yeah, so 2. But the law also says that if you don't have a policy committee, and when would you need a policy committee? 300 or more. Now, you don't have to wait till you're 300. The law also says you can set up a policy committee if you're under 300 employees. But the law says that if you don't have a policy committee, you need to add 2 members to your committee to do the functions or the roles of the policy committee. So really, you need 2 members minimum, but eventually, if you don't have a policy committee, you're going to need 4 members on your committee. And the law says that at least half of the members on the committee must be worker representatives, chosen, elected, selected by the workers, right? So this is to be viewed as a committee representing the employees, for the employees, and not a committee set up by the employer for the employer. Okay? And the things to consider in your committee size would be efficiency, right? So too large a committee may become cumbersome, may not operate effectively. Too small a committee may be lacking input, may be lacking perspective, right? So we need to kind of choose a number that's going to balance well with the number of employees we have, with the different unions, different work groups, different types of hazards we have, right? So those are all the things that we need to consider when we're setting up the committee. What would make up a good committee? And examples of things that I've seen happen, right? Trucking company, not uncommon. Truck drivers are never in the workplace because they're always on the road. So the person who gets chosen from the trucking company to be the worker representative is an administrative person from the office. How well is that committee going to operate when that person has no clue what happens in the warehouse, what happens on the crossdock, what happens on the road? Right? So we need to look at those things too. And the other thing too to consider also is the different shifts. You may do the same thing during the day as you do at night shift, but the night shift has different hazards than from the day shift. We probably want representation from that night shift also. Question? Yeah, well, usually that's in the collective agreements. But according to the Canada Labour Code, if the workplace is unionized, usually the union is involved through the collective agreement in making that selection for their worker representatives.
So do we have to have at least one employee per union?
If you have different unions, you probably would want representation from the different areas. Yeah, yeah, something to consider, right?
It's often in your contract.
It's in the collective agreement, oftentimes.
It can also be in your collective
Yeah.
agreement, that
So it's
they have a portion of it has to be part of the health and safety.
yeah. So you may not have a choice. It may be already in that collective agreement, right? For how you're gonna set this up. unionized. So, some factors to consider for the number of employees or the number of representatives on the committee. So, the worker reps and alternates. Now, the Canada Labour Code references alternates. What would be the purpose of the alternates? Which I think is a good idea, but what did we... Yeah, yeah. If I know I'm going to be in Cuba next week on vacation, then, and I know I won't be able to attend the meeting, then it becomes my duty as the worker member on the committee to contact my alternate and say, listen, you need to back me up here. You need to step in and be there for me next week. And by the way, this is what we've discussed, and this is bring that alternate member up to speed. That would be part of the commitment of the members of the committee, right? And every member should have an alternate, and that member is responsible to make sure that the alternate steps in when that member is not going to be able to attend or be able to participate in their activities. And what would be the purpose of that then? There's an ultimate purpose for that. What's the purpose? Quorum.
Efficiency.
Efficiency, yes, so that the committee's work and functions keep working even though members are not able to attend, right? So we don't stop doing what we were supposed to do because I'm not available, I'm in Cuba. By the way, I'm not going to Cuba, but but that would be the purpose of the alternates, right? So, so workers, they select from, it's their peers who actually select them to be committee members. It's not management. Management has nothing to do with the worker selection of the members on the committee. Now, with that being said, I know a lot of companies and a lot of employers have a hard time recruiting members to be on the committee. And I don't see anything wrong with an employer approaching an employee and saying, you know what, I think you would make a good committee member. Would you like to volunteer to be on the committee? And if that employee says, yeah, I don't mind, I'd like to be on the committee, guess what the employer then has to do? Well, not only train them, but before they actually train them, guess what they have to do with that employee who volunteered to be on the committee?
Get the permission from the
Yes, have a meeting with the employees and say, listen, Ivan has volunteered to be your rep on the committee. Are you guys okay with Ivan representing you? It needs to be done that way because the workers representing the workers on the committee need to be people who have been okayed by their peers, right? So it needs to be people who will be comfortable with that person representing them on the committee, so that there's good communication, there's good rapport between those committee members and those employees. If not, then it could be viewed as a committee set up by the employer for the employer, right? If it's union, then within your collective agreements, there is the specification for how that selection is going to be done. If it's non-union workers, they also have the right to select or elect who's going to represent them on the committee. And then it needs to be done determining the number of unions, non-union workers, and it needs to be done so that it's done in an equitable manner, right? And we need to look at the different hazards, different risks that we have in the selection of the worker members. Then from the employer's perspective, then the employer can do whatever they want here. The employer appoints an employer representative or employer representatives on the committee. Again, employer reps need to have alternates so that if they're not able to attend, someone can attend on their behalf. And that should be someone who exercises some form of managerial function for the employer. If employers are smart, though, employers will select an employer representative on the committee who has the authority to take immediate action on committee recommendations. No sense in appointing a messenger to the committee. That's the way I see it. If the employer representative on the committee cannot ever make any decisions and everything has to go back after the end of the meeting to check with the employer and I'll come back to you next month with an answer, then that's not the right employer representative on the committee. Because all that person really is just a messenger. The employer should appoint someone who has authority, who can deal with issues at the committee level, right? That would be the best way so that the committee is effective. And then we need to post the names of the committee members, and the Canada Labour Code says work locations, phone extensions, and the list of alternate members. Everyone in their workplace should know who represents who and what the committee members, who the committee members are on the committee. And for the meeting, we need to set the meeting date, the agenda. First meeting activity should include selecting the co-chairs, right? So once the committee has been set up, the employer representatives on the committee amongst themselves select who their co-chairperson is going to be, and the employee representatives on the committee then together they set up or they decide who their co-chairperson is going to be. So that's done internally within the committee, right? And there is a requirement, by the way, under federal jurisdiction to actually have co-chairpersons on the committee. So there needs to be one chairperson representing the employer and one chairperson representing the employees, right? And in our first meeting, then we review our draft terms of reference, and we also take a look at the documentation we're going to use for meeting agenda and meeting reports, right? That's how we get started with the meeting. So, terms of reference. Some of the things that should be on a terms of reference should be the name of the committee if you have a special name. It should be constituency. What is constituency? What is that? My presentation will be available on Monday, right? So you'll be able to download it.
And who are the members and who do they
Yeah,
represent?
who they represent. What areas, what departments of the company are represented on our committee. The committee's purpose. This is very important, right? The committee needs to have a purpose. What has the committee been put together for? The composition of the committee. How many members do we have? Who the co-chairs are and what their duties, responsibilities, and functions are. The terms of reference, terms of office. What's the terms of office under the Canada Labor Code regulations?
2 years.
It's 2 years. But there's also a section in there that also says that you may be selected to serve another term, right? So you may be elected to serve another term. So, but the terms of office for federally regulated companies is 2 years. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Amendments. How are we going to, yes?
Sorry, I have a question.
Yes.
Employees that are interested in participating in OSH committee, if they've been refused because
Yeah.
the process, their PSAC union,
Okay.
so they need to be voted in annually at the assembly,
Yeah.
general assembly.
And that becomes a little bit tricky because,
People,
yeah, a lot of times the unions will kind of direct how that's done. And that there's no way the employer has any control over that, right?
Employee side of the committee,
Yeah.
and whether it's done by election or.
Ballot or, yeah.
Just depends
Yeah.
on how.
The
Yeah.
each
legislation
local.
also says you have a right to participate, so if you so choose to participate,
Mhm.
the same crew has always been in there for years and years,
Yeah.
you don't get people who
Yeah.
can participate all the
Actually, and that's a good point you brought up, and I agree with you totally. If I was a smart employer, I would probably want most of my employees to participate through the committee, and I would set it up so that my employees have an opportunity to be part of the committee. It's part of our 3 rights: the right to know, the right to participate, and the right to refuse dangerous work. So, as a smart employer, I would want many of my employees, and as many of my employees, to actually be part of the committee because it gives them an opportunity to get involved in health and safety, gives them an opportunity to learn about health and safety, and when they leave the committee after their terms of office, they become a planted seed in the company for health and safety. So it makes it easy for me long-term down the road as an employer to actually run and do things in health and safety because my employees have actually participated and been part of that health and safety system, right? If I was a smart employer. So I would want it that way too, right? Because the other thing too, the terms of office is very important because I've been to committees where committee members have been in the committee for 10, 15, 20 years. And what happens with those committee members? Stagnant. No more ideas, very complacent, in some cases very, very biased, right? And so the committee doesn't function the way it's supposed to. So you probably want fresh ideas, new people, new perspectives into the committee to be injected every once in a while. And it doesn't mean that we're going to, mass exodus when our terms of office is done, everybody leaves and we start all over. But we set it up so that people come in and leave on a scheduled basis. Yes, you were going to say?
I was just going to say, you don't want to have a glut of all new people and no.
No, you want to set it up. Yeah, you want to set it up so that there's good in and out in a good fashion, right? Amendment, if we're going to make amendments to our terms of reference, how is that done? So that should be a section in your terms of reference if we need to update, review, change things, right? Another one in the terms of reference should be duties and functions specific to the co-chairs, to the members, worker members of the committee, to the employer members on the committee, to the secretary, right? So these need to be spelled out. And then how do we keep records? Who keeps records? How do we distribute records? How do we communicate our activities as a committee? And meetings, how often are we going to meet? Where? how meetings are going to be handled. And then agendas and minutes, how is that going to be done? And then recommendations. This is a big source of stress for a lot of committees, right? The recommendation portion. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Typically, this is what we see on terms of reference. Other things that you may add on your terms of reference is how do we handle conflict internally within the committee? Other things I've seen on terms of reference is if a committee member is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, how do we gently, nicely ask that committee member to leave our committee, right? If we need to replace a committee member, how is that done? Or if a committee member is going to resign, how is that going to be done? So that may be also something that you put as part of your terms of reference. I've seen that in terms of reference. Right? Remember, kindly, right?
In terms of reference, for a lot of these things, they're already in the legislation to say, you know.
You could reference, and you could do a terms of reference that's legislative based, but remember, the legislation is a minimum standard, right? You probably want to meet and exceed that standard if you can, or make it a little bit better, or make it a little bit more personal to your workplace, right? So you can have a terms of reference that's strictly based on Section 135 of the code, right?
Okay, so we can say.
Oh, you can say a lot of, yeah.
For any other element we see.
Yeah. You could do that. So, duties and functions of committee members, and again, the purpose of my presentation was not to walk you through Section 135 of the Canada Labor Code, but some duties that are common to committees are attending all committee meetings, promoting health and safety in the workplace at all times. It does not look good when the committee members are out in the yard and they're not wearing their safety vest. Right? What message does that send the employees?
It's okay to go.
Yeah, some of us are immune. Some of us don't have to follow health and safety procedure and policies or rules, right? So that's not a good message that is being sent to the employees, right? Committee members need to know that they're the ones that need to promote health and safety. So they need to comply with all the rules and they need to wear all their PPE all the time, right? Acting as a sounding board on workers' acceptance of health and safety policies, receiving and considering and resolving worker health and safety complaints, providing feedback on workers' suggestions, promoting and monitoring compliance with health and safety regulations, attempting to raise health and safety standards beyond the legal requirements, investigating and advising refusals to do work, assisting in the training of new workers. By the way, there's new work refusal changes in the Canada Labor Code, right? So committee members need to understand what the process is for that, how it's supposed to be done. Assisting in the training of new workers, participating in the identification and control of physical hazards, participating in assessments and the development of control programs for hazardous substances. So not only physical hazards, but also hazardous substances, chemicals, participating in incident injury investigation and inquiries, studying safety programs of other companies to enhance their own programs. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. The wheel's been invented a long time ago, right? So is there an opportunity for us to take something that another company does well and maybe implement it or make a suggestion or a recommendation in our company, right? IHSA has safety groups. That's a good vehicle, a good way to actually be part of that. Lots of networking. And consulting on health and safety education programs. This is embedded in the Canada Labor Code. Often the employer has to consult, have the participation of the committees to actually develop certain programs. And making health and safety recommendations. Committee members are also there to carry out audit inspections, to advise on personal protective equipment requirements and programs, maintaining records of incident and injury. So the committee members need to do that so they can track trends, right? Where are most of our incidents and what sort of things do we need to do to improve that area, right? Monitoring the effectiveness of health and safety program, assisting in the development of health and safety rules, assisting in the development of safety procedures, safe work procedures, and initiating other activities as indicated by the incident injury experience, right? So this is the bigger picture. This is where the committees actually need to be involved in, right? What has been our record? What are the main issues for health and safety in our company? And is the committee involved in addressing those, helping the employer and the employees improve in those areas? So these duties need to be produced in written form and need to be posted in the workplace and need to be given to each committee member, and hopefully committee members are signing off on committing to those duties. So many committees, as part of the terms of reference, have the committee members sign off on their duties and responsibilities. It's a commitment, right? And these are posted so that everyone in the workplace knows what the committee is there to do for them. Right? They become a good document to be used as a briefing training guide for new members of the committee, and they become a good source of information for all the workers, all the employees in the company. Carrying out the duties, well, sometimes there's going to be some constraints imposed by conflicts of interest, personalities, and pressures of external priorities. As soon as this is obvious, or as soon as it becomes evident, the committee needs to take action to actually stop this right away. Because if this is allowed to foster within the committee, this will impede the committee's effectiveness. And I say this because oftentimes in committees, people get voted or people get assigned to be part of the committee, and they may have their own agendas as to why they're on the committee. And so as soon as you identify that, you need to put a stop to that. That needs to be corrected, because if you allow that to happen, the committee will not work properly. These people are there to sidetrack things, and they're there to, to work towards their own agenda, and they're maybe not there to work towards the agenda that the committee has. Okay? Committee members also need to know the extent of their authority, right? So that needs to be spelled out. That should be part of the terms of reference and part of their functions. Remember, you're not there to police, you're not there to enforce, and you're not there to discipline any worker. I know some committees that the employer has given them ticket wallets where the committee members actually go out and write tickets for infractions to health and safety to the employees in the company. I've had employers who've called me and says, Ivan, would you think that's a good idea? Guess what I tell them? No, because that's not what your committee. Guess who should be doing that? Management. That's a management function. That's managers and supervisors should be correcting, fixing, disciplining, enforcing, right? That's not the committee's function. That's not the committee's function, right? And the chairperson's duties, well, chairpersons are very important to the committee. They're required by law. On committees with two chairpersons, the chairpersons will decide, do they chair together or do they alternate, right? So that's up to chairpersons to decide that. The Canada Labor Code doesn't make that decision. The Canada Labor Code just says to have two chairpersons on the committee, right? But then the chairpersons need to decide how they're going to do this. Do we do it together or do we alternate? Some of the functions of the chairpersons, well, their job is to schedule meetings, notify members in advance, prepare an agenda, invite special technical or specialist or resource persons to attend some of their meetings, preside over the meetings, guide the meetings as per the agenda, ensure that all discussion items end with a positive decision, review and approve minutes, and assign projects to members. So they have the power, the authority to assign or subdivide the committee into subcommittees or assign functions to committee members, right? By next month, we want you to come back and bring this type of information, for example, or go out and do a survey, right? So they can do that. And ensuring that the committee carries out its functions. So your chairperson has several goals or several important roles. They should know your group. They have to help the members get started. They plan ahead. They prepare for meetings, preside over the meetings, and evaluate the meetings. So I call the chairpersons the QC of the committee. What do I mean by QC? Quality control. They're responsible to make sure that the committee is functioning effectively. I actually know committee meetings that when they end, the two chairpersons stay behind and they actually evaluate how the meeting went. Was that a successful meeting? Did we address all the things, right? What can we do better next time, right? So the chairpersons really are there to oversee, preside over the meetings, but make sure that the committee is on track to meeting its goal, its purpose, and they become the quality control for the committee. Okay? That's what the chairpersons are there to do. Okay? And some key suggestions to enhance the meeting process: encourage participants to remain focused on the topic. Only one person should speak at a time during our meetings. Avoid sidetracking with unrelated issues. Put away the cell phones and tablets and all that. Prepare and distribute agendas ahead of time so it allows the members to prepare for the meetings. Keep the focus on the issue, not the person. I attended a meeting once where the management representative in the committee was adamant that he needed to know who had brought up that issue that was brought up at the committee table. Where did it come from? I need to know who made, because he wanted to, he was concerned about the person, he wasn't concerned about the issue. And it's not about the people, it's about the issue we need to discuss, right? And listen to all sides of the discussion. So the chairpersons need to have a pretty good understanding of, every story has two sides. What are the issues here, and where do the issues come from? And that's really what the chairpersons are there to do. Although it's not mandatory and not required by law, every committee should have a secretary. Very important role. Secretary's role is to keep records, report on the status of recommendations made to the employer, prepare the minutes and agendas for the meetings, distribute minutes after their approval, distribute safety information to members, and assist the chairpersons as required. So oftentimes the secretary is not even a member of the committee, right? Appointed by the employer to actually just do the secretarial work. And the other thing I'm also going to tell you, it doesn't have to be the female rep on the committee who is the secretary. We got to get that stigma out of our heads, right? Anyone on the committee could be a secretary, right? It doesn't have to be the female rep. So, but that secretarial work is very important, right? Because records are actually required by law, right? So some records that the committee is going to have to keep, they have to keep records of all of their activities. They have to keep records of any correspondence, reports, test results, employee training, hazard documentation. And the committee will maintain copies and records of everything that they do. And under federal jurisdiction, federal companies are required to keep at least minimum 2 years worth of records of what the committee has been working on. Yes?
I thought records of employee training was
The employer, yeah. Maybe I should rephrase that because that's the employer's duty, but the committee should maybe, because the committee needs to also make sure, because that's one of the powers the committee has, is to actually question what training do we give our employees and how often have we trained them on certain things, right? So the committee has access to all this documentation. That's really it. Meetings, every organization has meetings, but not all those meetings are always effective. So some things you need to consider if you're going to have effective meetings. You need to have effective chairpersons. You need to have a good agenda. You need to have a process for making decisions if we're going to make a decision. And you need to have a well-managed discussion. And you need to have a good physical setup to be able to do this. I actually went once to a committee meeting. Their meetings were in the lunchroom. So employees were coming into the fridge, using the toaster, making coffee, right? Warming up a pizza pocket, right? And so how confidential can this meeting be when you got 10, 20 people coming in and out of the lunchroom, and how good is that committee meeting minutes are going to be, or meeting going to be, if there's all kinds of interruption and people are listening to things that should be confidential in some cases, right? So there should be a good productive physical setup. So your agenda is important because your agenda is the step-by-step outline for the things that are going to be discussed. And it should be distributed several days prior to the meeting so that the committee members have time to prepare to come with information specific to that agenda. And your terms of reference should definitely address how to make effective decisions as a committee, right? How to deal with conflict, how to resolve issues, and how to make decisions. That should be something that's part of your terms of reference. So, an effective discussion to involve people. You can ask each group member to give their input. Sometimes members are shy though, and that doesn't work very well. You can use anonymous surveys. You can use buzz groups, or you can do brainstorming as a committee altogether. But there's different ways of trying to get the committee members to participate as in the committee. The other thing too is handling conflict. If you think that there is conflict, or you think that there could be conflict, you should look at what the conflict is, what the problem is, what the cause or causes for the conflict are, right? Gather information regarding that conflict and those causes. And then possible solutions to deal with those causes, the consequences of implementing those solutions, mutually accepting what the solution is going to be. So it should be a process of consensus, meaning that we generally agree together on this. No coercion, no voting, no twisting arms, right? And carrying out the agreement once we agree that that's what we want to do, so that all parties share in the consensus, and also if eventually we look at evaluating if that solution is really working for us. Your physical setup, right? If the employer provides refreshment, lunch, you're good to go, right? But you probably want to do this in a room where you can sit and see each other. You have access to audiovisual equipment. You have access to the internet if you need to search something, right? I mean, that would be optimal, but employers who understand this, employers make this available to the workers because it's required under Section 125 of the duties of the employer to provide cooperation and assistance for the committees to actually be able to perform their duties, right? So this would be the things that the employer would want to do. Right? And set up for an effective discussion, you want to use your agenda. Your agenda should cover these things here, right? These would be some of the things that are covered in typical agendas. So an agenda should usually look something like this. You may have more items on the agenda, but typically this is the items that would be on an agenda. And how do you use your agenda more effectively? Well, the earlier part of a meeting is usually the more lively, more creative. So if you have key items, important items that need to be discussed, put those at the beginning of your meeting, right? In the beginning of your agenda. Because if you wait for the end, guess what people are watching now when they know it's going to be close to the end? They're watching time, and then those items will not be discussed properly, right? And put the order of the items will also influence the atmosphere for your meeting. So you want to start with items that unite, items that are positive and unite the group first, right? We don't want to start with the conflict issue first, because that's going to set the tone for our meeting. All right? And using your agenda, a lot of times I've seen companies put time limits next to the agenda item so that the members know how much time is allocated to a specific item. So the meetings don't go on forever and forever. Right? It's the co-chair's responsibility to ensure that times are respected and the agenda items are covered. And so you want to review the agenda at the beginning of the meeting, make sure everyone is in agreement with it. And your minutes, these are typically the things that are included in the minutes. The federal government used to have a template for minutes, but they actually got rid of that template. But it used to be part of their toolkit. They used to have a template for what they wanted to see minutes like. But your minutes don't have to conform to any specific format. But typically, this is the information that would be part of your minutes. Right? If an enforcement officer came in and they wanted to see your minutes, these are the things they would want to see in the minutes.
Question?
Yes?
I don't see it up there, but one of the things that I've heard is that an item should be shown as closed at least once a week.
Yeah, usually with these, there's usually timelines, and there's usually somewhere in there it says if the item was taken care of or the item is still ongoing, right? So yeah, these are just the topics, but you would want to have some sort of a time limit or time management tool.
But also show that it's closed.
That it's closed.
Once on the minutes is done, right? Prove that it's
Completed, yeah. And some companies show that by showing a completed action signature, completion date signature, who did it and when it was done. And that's totally fine. Yeah. And using your minutes more effectively, the minutes provide a permanent record of what's happened and transpired in the meetings, keep tracks of progress, informs absent members, helps familiarize new members with the committee. They need to be completed promptly and distributed and posted in a timely manner. There's no timeline in the Canada Labor Code. What do you think would be a reasonable timeline for the date of the meeting, conclusion of the meeting, and the producing of the minutes and posting and distributing of the minutes? What would be a reasonable time? 3 days that's good if you can do that. We usually say about a week. Within a week of your meeting, you should be producing your minutes and distributing your minutes within a week. What do you guys do?
We produce the minutes within a week or two, but we always review them at the next minute
before
they get officially signed off.
Because there could be changes, amendments, yeah. The sooner you do it, the better it is, because and it's sometimes it may not be possible to do that, right? And be used as communication tools. So employers required to post. You're required to post your minutes. The minutes have to remain posted for 30 days, and your most current minutes need to be posted on your safety boards, right? Some companies email them to all their employees also, right? Or if you have an intranet that has health and safety staff, they're usually posted there. Recommendations. So this is the last thing we're going to look at here. Effective committees will write recommendations to the employer, but effective committees, some committees don't know how to do this very well. And so committees have two options when it comes to recommendations. They can deal with the issue immediately within the committee and it doesn't become a recommendation, or if they can't deal with it internally within the committee, then it creates a formal recommendation to the employer. And the committees need to have a form for making the recommendation to the employer. Right? So here's how you would develop a recommendation. Discuss the issue at your meeting that requires action. Can the employer representative on the committee make a decision? If the employer rep can make a decision, then record the decision in the minutes, include the responsibility in the timelines, who's going to do what, when it's going to get done, and then the issue is done, you move on to the next issue. All you have to do is follow up to make sure the issue was taken care of. If the employer rep on the committee cannot make a decision on that issue, then that becomes a formal recommendation to the employer. That's how it works. Okay? And so now you have your recommendation form and you develop a recommendation. Two things you might be making a recommendation on: a basic issue or a complex issue. Basic issue is usually a simple issue. You describe what the occupational health and safety issue is, what the issue is, why it's an issue, who's affected, where it takes place, and when. And you make your recommendation and what you suggest be done and when you expect this to be done. Simple issue, basic issue. What would require complex issue recommendations? What sort of things would require a little bit more detailed recommendation? Things that cost money, yes. Things that require you to review or do new policy or procedure, change in process, new equipment, right? So, policy, directive, or procedure creation or revision may require a formal recommendation with it's a complex issue. Changes to equipment, office layout, process, allocation of funds, something that requires training or orientation to be developed. Commitment and follow-up to issues where earlier corrective actions have been ignored or have gone unnoticed or haven't really corrected the issue. Matters which require review and or agreement of other divisions, departments, and areas. Maybe other people need to be involved. So, complex issue. This requires a little bit of research, not only describing what the issue is, the what, why, who, where, when, but you may also have to reference some occupational health and safety legislation, some standards, some guidelines. You may have to do a survey. You may have to call someone in to do testing, sampling, right? So this requires a little bit more time, requires a little bit of research. And then you would describe your options, give the options to the employer. And in describing your options, you need to consider all these things. What steps are required? How well would this fix the problem? How long will it take? How much will it cost? Who will be affected? Why did the committee decide to make this recommendation? So that's very important, the opinion of the committee and why they're making this recommendation. So you provide the recommendation in written format, formal recommendation to the employer, and the employer then has to respond to your recommendation. Under federal jurisdiction, how many days does the employer have? 30 days, yeah. Disregard the 21, that's for provincially regulated companies. You are 30 days, 30 calendar days. The employer agrees, the employer responds and says, yes, here's the timetable, what we're going to do. The employer says no, then the employer has to inform the committee in writing why of the delay or why they don't agree with the recommendation. So in the employer's response is, yes, we accept it. So action plan, right? Who's going to do what, when it's going to get done, and how we're going to do this. If the employer rejects the recommendation, then the employer has to give reasons to the committee why they're rejecting the recommendation. And what this does is it allows the committee to revisit the recommendation and maybe tweak or change the recommendation and make the recommendation again. Right? So this is usually the process that works for making proper recommendations. And if you do this well enough, this will entice the employer in responding better in a positive manner towards the committee's recommendations. I've seen committee recommendations one-liner. We need new dock doors for all of our dock, we need new dock doors. Oh, the employer's not going to go out and spend $200,000 for new dock doors, right? So what I've told committees is, do a little survey. Look to see which are the dock doors or the dock doors that get used most often. So maybe you want to start there. Maybe there's 10 doors that you use every day more than any other doors. So maybe your recommendation is, we would like these 10 doors to be replaced, and here's the reason why, right? That may be a recommendation that the employer agrees. But having 100 doors be replaced is not something the employer is gonna agree on, right? So how we make the recommendation, the research that we put behind it, and why we think it's a good recommendation, the employer wants that information. And employers love numbers. If you could put numbers in your recommendation, they will pay attention to the recommendation, right? Yes?
What about including any legislation that the employer may be violating?
Yeah, exactly. You would want to include that. Standards, guidelines, legislation, right? By the way, we're not in compliance with this here. Take a look at this, right? That's why we're making this recommendation. Yes?
Options would be great too. So
Yeah.
if you can say, well, here's A, B, or C,
Yeah.
A, B, and C,
Yeah.
choose.
You can ask for the...
If you can.
Yeah, you can ask for the Cadillac, but don't expect the employer to give you the Cadillac. The employer may give you the Honda Civic, and that will take you there. It'll work, right? So maybe, the different options is important to consider. All right, so my last slide. Characteristics of an effective committee: they are proactive, right? They're looking ahead, looking at the future. They're working on the bigger picture for health and safety. They create best practices. They use new ideas for identifying and analyzing hazards. They promote safety awareness beyond the committee. They network, right? They produce an annual summary of their accomplishments, their successes, the things they worked on. And they share this with the employer and the employees. And remember that the committees are the eyes and ears of the company as a monitoring body for health and safety in the workplace. So that, my friends, concludes my presentation. So thank you guys for attending. And as we've been saying all day, it's important you have this information, but what you do with this information is more important than anything. So taking some of this, taking it back to your workplace and applying it there, right? Doing something with it. Thank you. Have a good afternoon. Safe drive home. We'll see you next year.